So this is an XORG session which is about playtesting further development of certain nifty things we've been playtesting in the last week, especially. Um, that's all I can do for a start. That's how cheap I am. But yeah,
Yeah.
any comments, which is also comments for the last week, considerations.
If I may,
Mhm.
so I don't maybe have like larger kind of diagrammatic view on what we did as you were introducing, you would present from your side. But what I thought about a couple of things that happened there, and maybe it's good that I say them just to kind of also
Definitely.
check on like where I am in my head. I thought it was really interesting what happened last week, and this experience of being thrown off so much of your stable ground by these kind of scenario stimulations was like extremely is it invigorating or like like activating anyway. What I thought it was really kind of there was a lot kind of, you feel this kind of acid holes opening everywhere where you just want to kind of throw yourself through in a way and like see what can go wrong. But I also thought that in the sense of kind of where was the opportunity kind of located to kind of play with what an organization is. I thought that was much with you, Pekko.
Yes.
Because of the chance you had and the position that you had to bring those scenarios, and basically they were. I found there was some mega good stuffs in there. For example, like, so we speak about the university and want to think what it is or what it can be. And the first thing that you bring up is, so you're sitting in a bar with some friends. And I was like, hey, awesome. I mean, so like, I didn't have to think of it because it was you who did that. But like, I was like, in retrospect, I was like, so, okay, so the first thing we think about university is not a university at all, but we do discover in that way that part of the university is the fact that people are sitting someplace in bars and are talking about what they are doing, and that's the institution. I mean, that's at least the kind of consequence of the institution. And it was just something that I noted, and then I was a bit thinking like, okay, so should it also be us who make those scenarios? But then I thought that was a bit of a kind of too linear a conclusion to draw. And I felt that probably we get to more of those things, more of those kind of by the wayside kind of droppings of that's what you think this is type of stuff. And I thought it would be good that those could be collected. So maybe what I was now doing until this moment where I'm telling you this is that I collected those. So maybe that should then be could be part also of how we proceed further.
Yeah, that's actually among the things that I wanted to process today. Like, I have some like drafty structures precisely collectivizing this, like opening it to community and so on. Like, but of course we can kind of rework, destroy, and make better structures if needed towards that. But like some starting points towards that, definitely. But I agree everything which is what you said. Like, and also your characterization that it was kind of me running the show, and that's like for the structure. It's I think it's completely possible. We'll come to that, to just collectivize that. There is actually benefit, I think, for saying you now are running the show for these 2 hours. That possibility is actually useful, not just for university, but kind of for any kind of this kind of generation organizational generation, like generating organization. Um, uh, of course, it's useful that you can also say we're all running the show. But it's useful to have this sort of facilitator, game mastery like role as a potential as well.
Doubtlessly, and just like my point being that, like, and I'm not saying that it's a diagnosis because I don't have enough experience to kind of know, what how these things play out. But my observation was, or like my thought was more to what kind of explorative potential is granted to either of the positions that we took on the last time. So is there another type of explorative potential granted to the game master in comparison to the participants? So would it, in terms of having the opportunity to play with, in this case, what is a university?
Yeah, that's just short comments. I'm talking too much already, but I think first of all, just to make some highlights, because that's a big topic and a very fertile topic you're opening, but just a couple of highlights. I think, even though this is larger than this case university, and we can visit that certainly, but it is actually rather interesting to think that there is no teacher, but there is a game master. It's actually kind of somebody who is setting up learning, but not mainly teaching, but then everybody's learning. And because there's so much structural toolkit for the game master. I mean, one can take from facilitator toolkits as well, but there's a lot of interesting stuff if you take that concept. And that was kind of sort of part of the playtest last week. But I think there's more there. But then the second highlight is this, well, maybe I'll leave it for later because I've talked enough. Let's push for others, what are their experiences, feelings, present or video or whatever form.
Yeah, I agree that last session was super exciting and productive and fun, particularly fun, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking if what's happening right now, sort of like updating others on what happened last time, snippets here and there, it's sort of like us also doing like a saved state, like this mechanism that we sort of talked a bit about that also plays into how to design forgetfulness, what remains, what is forgotten, and how to maybe have like a more explicit connection to saved states when we play, and then we want to update others on how that went. Yeah, I don't know, just thinking if that is something that's happening right now, maybe to be conscious about it. And yeah, that's it. It was super nice last time.
Yeah, I have actually a lot to discuss on the save state. I thought about it, and it's actually, it's a very fertile way of thinking about it. Like just a short, a snippet. You can think that everything organization uses to kind of represent what it is kind of a save state, because how it functions, it allows the return to a certain state, not completely. Like having a protocol for a meeting is a save state, even though it's new people or people in a different state that come in. But that's totally within the realm of video game save state. Like you were saying, Pablo, last time, like many save state didn't save everything. They saved the key things. And once you open that thought, okay, actually organization, what it is as a kind of document is a kind of a save state. There is a really interesting correlation that you can start to play with.
Yeah, I'm wondering right now, it just came to my mind, because sort of like you play a video game and then the only thing that becomes canon, of course, is what the last playthrough you made where you didn't lose a life and just ended up the level, right? But whatever experience you had during that level remain in your mind and you act differently. So what if we would like in an organization replay a meeting, right?
Yeah,
Just
exactly.
like
Yeah.
just go and do the same meeting once again, same thing, but we just like, we know what happened last time, but it does not become canon, right?
Yeah.
I would like to do a couple of meetings again.
Yeah. So meetings have 3 lives, for example. Our meetings have 3 lives. They can be repeated maximum 3 times. Like if like whatever it is, but it's a really interesting, like that's precisely kind of things that start to open up from there. Yeah.
And
like,
some meetings very much should be game over, right? Like we collectively are like, no, this meeting, it's done. Yeah, game over. We have to do it again. Forget it.
Yeah. The meeting died also. Any thoughts also, Mikael, actually, like from, I mean, whether it's from the last session or just thoughts about the topics in the air.
Yeah, very quickly. Sorry, actually, if you were about to say something. I kind of like that idea about like game master replacing teacher, at least for the time until we kind of come up with even a better name, because well, let's say if you turn the labyrinth or dungeon into a kind of card game mode, let's say, I like Lord of the Rings card game very much. It's we all play a certain amount, different characters, but we are all playing against the board, against the kind of mechanics, and it functions so that, okay, we have a deck of cards, and we shuffle them, and we draw cards and put them right in the center of the table, and those cards present different sort of like challenges, and we need to kind of deal with those challenges before they deal with us, and kind of in a similar way, this kind of dungeon is a very modular and also like a procedural structure, if we want to think it that way, and kind of how to keep the impression that we don't know what's behind the next corner, and you posted this image of the haunted Hill House earlier today, and it was very fun because it's a house and it's not underground, it's actually kind of on the ground level, and this makes you also ask, okay, what's behind the walls, what is outside, and okay, what is the dungeon, if we bring the outside inside the dungeon, how will this twist the kind of experience of the outside, and so on, kind of what kind of lens or something like that is it, and then these things kind of also lead to think about kind of this like more video game making type of stuff. Okay, what sort of like search or pathfinding algorithms, or kind of what sort of like ray casting or kind of shadow casting kind of is it possible, like in the forest, we see some parts of the forest, but there are also like shadows, and are those shadows like those places where we can use more of our imagination and so on. So I think it's a kind of very productive structure. This was just like free association.
Yeah, that's a whole nother realm. The last comment you made, like I have a lot on that particular part. Like I kind of at one point years ago worked on this project of kind of spatializing tarot card like existence, like and one of the key things was to keep the card likeness in the sense that how do intellectuals create processes of spaces that something is specific, say a house, something like then you might have around it like an infinity, but how does that play? Like it's like you could, it's like a forest, but you can walk forever into it, but there is certain kind of happenings in there, and how you can create those kind of structures. And I'm kind of, that work has been kind of troubling with me because it creates a really interesting, like different logics. I also stole a lot from video games, which have been doing this because of they had to, because the technical limitations and whatnot. So you have a lot of spaces that actually follow different logics. Like it seems infinite, but it's actually not. It's actually a cube. But then it also has this fog, which means that these things that are there are not actually there at that moment, and things like this, and like a, which is actually, when you turn it to strength, an interesting possibility altogether. Yeah, there's a lot there. Actually, any comments?
Yes. I do have. One is my normal comment, which is like, what are the next steps, and how can we get some outputs out?
I think
that's
actually,
a joke. That's a joke.
Yeah.
Partly. No, because I think that like it's obvious that, because you were right from the beginning, kind of what kind of a treasure horn this is, the games, like to think about organizations and the kind of the scenarios, the save state now here, kind of for I'm already seeing like this playing organizations into existence, a guidebook.
Yeah,
it's a must. It's a must. Kind of a material set that we need really to change the tone and the kind of the affect about organizations and meetings.
No, actually agreed. And I think like in some ways, like it's a guidebook, but it can be also kind of considered really just even a game. Like the game has an effect of playing an organization to existence. Which is a kind of interesting kind of point of conflux, because like games often don't think about what they generate, that it would be persistent, but it can be. Like, and this is also Mikael's, your directions and the kind of questions. Like it's not even that hard. It's just not something that we don't normally think about. But like the possibilities open as useful material for maybe using later, or using later as a basis is completely possible. So in this sense, like working towards those kind of directions is something I think is opening up here. And it, in some ways, like actually the instruments like relate to precisely this, like how those topics or the processes that we had last time, like how you can have those kind of processes, well, more, but then also in a more flexible manner, that it's not just like say me running the show, but how you could kind of open those up, and also like how they could relate to, like you had this scene, you played that, what kind of relations they could have with other scenes, other potential scenes that are saved, and therefore kind of replayable or playable for the first time. And I think all of that is actually quite, it doesn't even have to be that complicated as a structure, but that's kind of like among the topics for today, which of course, like for Axel's first question, potentially feeds towards such a guidebook and a game. But yeah, like that's kind of like, if we want to dive into those, I could try to squeeze into 10 minutes like a short introduction of, and then we can see like how wrong I am, or like is there any use to these ways of structuring things. And this will be still drafty and sketchy, but that's then for us to make better, or make better forms. But if you're okay with that, I could kind of like put on the table some forms to start off. No rejections. So okay, I'll try to make this sort of also concrete, to have some examples. Let's, like, if we think of the last session and what was happening. So there was a game master. The game master was setting up what we essentially can think of scenes. They could have been setting those scenes by, say, reading a book or a document by somebody else, which would be the ingredients of the scene, and then they would make that scene which the others can play. In this situation, or the last week's situation, I was making them up for myself, but I could have already been using somebody else's material. It's like, here's how you make a scene for chimerics, which was the topic. That material could have also contained like a series of scenes. Like we had 2 scenes. The material could have been that it has actually 10 scenes. And it could also say that, you know, they're not necessarily linear, like first you have to play this and play this, but they could be, you know, freely organizable, or to have some other logic, like the players choose. Now that you were in this scene, you could go towards that kind of a scene or that kind of scene, choose by yourselves, or some other logic again. So to underline from there, it would be possible to communicate the scenes as ingredients. It would be possible to have somebody facilitating it, like a game master-like role. It also could be possible to divide the game master into different roles. Like the common contemporary play or game design theory rather, considers game master really just as one player. And like some of the smarter ones have already noted, it's really just this sort of convention of certain rights. And we can already see many games that kind of break it, like, actually you get the responsibility of time, and you get the responsibility of the people, or you get these and these like extra people, and you get some other responsibility. So it's not like a take it or leave it kind of a thing. It doesn't need a game master. Precisely, the roles can be, or the role can be distributed into different people. And then those kind of scenes can that are played can be generative scenes. This is a little bit like Mikael has been doing, this sort of questions that then generate material by the answers that can be imagined or seen as part of organization. Like similarly here, the scene is kind of generative. Like we actually use that to generate a completely non-existent imaginary kind of science, but that may be a form of I don't know, theoretical model maybe, or language form. But when we come to the saves, and kind of saving it in an expanded sense, like not just saving as it is, one can steal from that, yes, but we can look at what does it actually do and what kind of things are around that thing. So we can think of like whatever is generated from the scenes can be in a way saved, like this happened. It can also be saved in a form, let's say in an example that somebody sets up a scene which is about playing an organization, like testing out, like we actually want this and this kind of a scene in our organization which does not yet exist. And then we play out the scene, and afterwards we mark, hey, I like that thing. That was a good rule. That was a good moment. How do we write that down to be something that is safe for the organization? Like we had this moment where we had this and this sort of style of conversation. How could that be written for kind of rules of the meeting? And then we write that down. This is also saving. This is kind of like what is generated is then stabilized, but it can be stabilized in a kind of dynamic fashion. It's not all take it or leave it, but it's like, oh, that was a good form. Let's put it in rules, and then we can come back to it and repeat it from the save point we created. So it's kind of intelligent saving in a way, like in that sense. So So in this sense, the scenes can be generative, but then if we consider the saving and this sort of intelligent saving, it can also be something that then is used to stabilize or set in stone or whatever, like a organizational reality, or a starting point. But coming back to this example that the scene I used could have been written as ingredients by somebody else, the rules that we create can also be a basis that somebody else in somewhere in the world uses what we saved from a scene as their starting point for a completely different organization. They like our rules for a meeting we generate and saved, and they use it in their own organization. So sharing is also possible from things that are saved. And of course, not everything has to be saved. Somebody can generate an interesting scenario or scene by just coming up with interesting ingredients, and that's already kind of like behaves like the save does. Finally, like from here, we can look at possibilities of map-like relations. This is a little bit visited with the sort of thought of the dungeon and the concept of the mega dungeon, which is an interesting concept in itself. And is that one of the qualities, what I find interesting about them is that they actually kind of combine, well, three paradigms that are all quite powerful. Like the mega dungeon combines the underworld, the infinite labyrinth, that like mythological concept. But they also combine this sort of labyrinth itself, like to get from here to there, I have to go through this corridor and then that corridor and that cross section, etc., which is essentially just a network. You don't have to think about it as a dungeon per se. You can think of it as kind of sophisticated networking, where all the connections also can have a lot of interesting stuff in them. But then finally, it also has the paradigm of what you could call a stage or a scene, which is the room. That how they behave in these games, these rooms, is really like stages. Like somebody describes, okay, there is like a water running through this room, and then on the wall there is some paintings, and there's these characters or agents, and then the scene starts from there. They're really played like scene, and the room is really like a stage. So you have modularization, you have compartmentalization around the concept that kind of incorporates everything from this sort of interactive stage idea. And so for me, the whole concept of this sort of mega dungeon is not just interesting for dungeons. It is this sort of structural thought that, hey, actually combining this sort of network thought with a kind of stage scene-like approach and combining that with generative and saving, you have an interesting take on not just one organization and generating those, saving those, but also like larger ways of sharing organizations and relating organizations, and like how the network could be used, for example. So these are the bird's eye view directions, but then I'm trying to paint the connections between those directions and why they are kind of already connected. I'm probably skipping over some parts because I'm kind of pulling from game knowledge, and sometimes I'm blind to what is not like immediately apparent. But if that kind of overview makes any sense, well, I guess that's the topic I open up. Like, did that make sense?
Can you repeat it? Like, what was it? Network, scene, saving? Was there fourth?
So kind of, yeah, like, I mean, like if one picks up topical concepts, I think definitely picking this sort of kind of interesting, sophisticated take on networking and kind of spatialization of networking. The scene and how these rooms and these sort of interactive scenes are an interesting take on not just the stage, but the sort of potential of generation of action from existing expressions. and then like this potential of kind of intelligent saving, of having a process, then thinking about what to save from there to change in that place, for example, an organization, and utilize those as kind of different starting points. So that's there's other things to pick, but those definitely would be something I would highlight from there.
May I?
Yeah, sure. Like anybody, just say out loud.
I think I'm well suited to comment because I don't know so much about this gaming, so probably I can translate hopefully.
Yeah.
So what I think what you're all right, like it's a question. What I think you're making the point about is that like it's a suggestion for a couple of structures that stand in opposition to a kind of monocentric game mode. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah. Also,
so
yeah.
Yeah. So and I think this sounds super interesting, and I'm a bit kind of fascinated by how it meets me at a point where I've been thinking about just those types of things. And if I may, so like what I'm taking with me is maybe a bit from the back to the front, the kind of, so you have certain saved states which are generated by, we come to that. Then you have specifically also kind of the, how to say, explosion of what could otherwise be a linear narrative or some type of thing in a kind of, delimited, somewhat kind of membraned off stages or scenes. And then I thought, and this goes actually back immediately, in my head anyway, to the first comment that I tried to make when we started talking today, about who generates those. And I think in like who generates those stages and who's responsible for the creation. And I think in your example, if I understood you well, it was about that many different people, also kind of distributed in space, distributed in time also, and not connected to the same quote unquote game, could set off from whatever stage or scene that had been prepared or used or saved by another game. So adding to that, a thought that came to my mind while you were talking, or actually even before that, when you were talking about the game master, and then coming back to my point of the beginning, that I said, okay, there was this clear differentiation between you being the game master last week, and us being the kind of fillers in, or like actors in, players in that scene that you said. What I thought was that if we would I mean, it's just probably one variety of how one could conceive of the role of the game master. Like, what if each player present in a scene would kind of, at quote unquote the conclusion of the scene, turn into a kind of door, meaning a game master for a following, a potential, possible following scene.
Yes.
So that,
yeah, like that's precisely kind of a thing that is freed up, just as the logic of where to go next is kind of very free, but also can be kind of constrained by design. Like, now we actually want to set linear. Now we actually want to set like free choice. Now we want to set something else. Like, similarly, like how is it run, who runs it is kind of up to design. Like to take an example, like it might be completely useful at some point, like somebody says like, hey, I'm interested in this direction, for example, to develop the organization that we have, or just open up a topic. Just like, let's say I had this chimerics as an example topic to test a non-existent thing, and I could have said like, hey, I'm interested in this. What about if I run this game, which I'm essentially saying that I'd be kind of forming a new plate, and through that we generate the idea. And maybe after that, we kind of intelligently save some parts of it, like the things you generated or so on. And then afterwards, somebody says like, hey, I'm interested in this, I could run this, or we two together are interested in this, and we have this idea of how to run it, like one person runs the people and another person runs the cuts of time, like a film, like whatever it is. And then people can play those. So you have a lot of SNTL freedom in a kind of simple manner of like setting up different ways of setting up the situation, different ways of like modifying or controlling or facilitating the situation. And those are all in the palette, in a way, of possibilities.
And if I, short comment, if I get this well, then I think the specific contribution that this model that you're suggesting is making is basically the increase for a possibility of saved states by the increase of, or like of the decrease of the unit to be saved. Am I like the decrease in size of the unit to be saved? So we don't have to be talking about one dungeon. That's why I think the mega dungeon is coming up, because we can look at smaller states, save those, so to speak, individually, and then help ourselves in composing forward from those. So like you kind of decrease the size of the unit, of the module, if you wish, and you increase kind of membranity, like membrane surfaces, by basically what you get by splitting that up, right?
Yeah. And also you introduce the intelligence of what to save. Like you don't just decrease the size, but you kind of take what you want out of it. And maybe one dimension also is like what is being generated can exist as a speculative thing. That is like we're playing through this, but it's not immediately being set in stone, like this is what we are writing in blood of how things work in the future, but rather that becomes an evaluation point. Like this is actually now what we set in stone, this we throw away, this we put back into a new process because it introduced an interesting direction, therefore we actually want to open it up more so it goes to another game, kind of. So there's sort of playing between what is speculative and what is actual kind of reality for us becomes also something that is to be decided upon and can be chosen.
I think this relates very much to what we said last time, how sort of limits in computation brought the most interesting creativity in design of saved states, right? How video games in the past had super interesting mechanisms, and how reducing the size of what we save allows for that creativity to emerge. And I think it's really interesting, like, to be respectful of human cognition, right? How do we design for that saved state to be the least amount of information, the most significant? It's super interesting. And I'm understanding saving now as a process of formalization.
Yes. Right.
And we've done this before with remember when we were putting down tokens. You know, like there's this comment and that was saving in a way, right?
Yeah, it was.
So that's it. Just a fast comment.
No, completely agreed. Bye, actually. Like
nice
that
you.
He was here like originally the last meeting, but it's nice that he stayed for a while, and I know he's been watching. Like he's saying comments from the videos, so that's a proof. But Mikael, do you have?
Yes, something. Perhaps not all of that, like so closely, like links with your approaches, but that's really interesting that like this takes on saving and kind of. I'm just trying to think. It's so much to do with kind of memory and kind of maybe then like access points to memory,
yes,
like living post-its or something like
yeah,
that, which is very small flag that you put somewhere, and then trying to remember these like old games, and it's just like, okay, one way to do it was like to kind of so that the game has the ability to kind of generate the game again, which like of course means that there is no true like randomness or something like that. But then again, it's very interesting that if you only save something, you will have the loss of information, but then you will of course also have something excess that comes to replace this information that you lose. And
yeah,
I think this is very interesting. What and how can we get the most out of this like excess that kind of comes with it? And then again, when you mentioned about the maps, kind of if you think about memory or kind of memory points in time or space, you can of course turn them into symbols, and you can turn them into symbols that relate to a map as well. So I think this is very interesting. And then very small comment also to kind of these like networked spaces. I think it would be very interesting to think about the relations between these spaces, how they kind of how they could be made to network, and kind of to try to map the possible ways of the kind of how the dungeon could flow, so to say.
Yeah, one metaphor to put on this memory is that I think what this kind of saving is looking at mainly, not only, but mainly, is if memory is popularly considered as kind of like if you would have a memory of a meal, it would be the meal itself, whereas this would be looking at saving the ingredients and the recipe. That it's more like it's not the finished carrot cake, but it's like it's the recipe of and kind of ingredients like carrots and whatever goes to a carrot cake. I'm bad cake cook, but like it's like that would be the main emphasis. Like you can think of course like saving that wants to be as faithful like video and whatnot, or goes towards that, but here comes like emphasis and well the possibility first, but then the emphasis also to that like how actually have the ingredients that can produce an infinity of carrot cakes, which are all different, and that's also like key to the kind of replayability is and playability elsewhere, because like if somebody plays it, it's also about what they generate, which can turn the situation of losing some memory from rather weakness to strength. Is like for them it might be much more interesting to have like play the structure but with their issues and their context and their people who are processing it. And just to kind of put that in a thought, like so this is just I pulled from Google Images, like searching one-page dungeons, and not this particularly, pulled semi-randomly, but I wanted to point out that even though it's not thought about usually this way, first of all, this is a recipe rather than an authentic save state of like, because all this communication here is about how somebody else can play it, like how they can kind of create the situation out of it. And whatever is like marked here, like an entrance or these sort of areas, they're there to give this sort of material to kind of spawn them to existence. And all the side comments, etc., are there to support that in and of themselves. Secondly, I don't think it's the only way. And like I said, I don't think these have to be literally dungeons, but I'm looking at the structure at the same time. But this is very much a network. It's setting like a room like an entrance, which is really about the interface in a way to this network. And then all the corridors, positions of rooms are kind of setting this into a network reality. And then what happens in the rooms, what is kind of coded into the rooms are also about the network, because they are about access to the other rooms, but also about their own processes in and of themselves. So it's actually a kind of, it's a recipe, definitely. It's about ingredients rather than the final meal. It's about you being able to create the meal out of it. And it's about kind of networking and relations. So interestingly, like these issues have been kind of already in play, but they are not just generally thought in this sort of like what's the potential here kind of thinking. Like what's the potential beyond this particular form of the structures that people are utilizing. So yeah, like, and then there is these sort of different techniques, like for example the chart on the side, which reads the 12 mundane items. It's actually a different interaction system which allows you to randomize which items are found, which of course affect how the network is approached. And so items are not simply placed in rooms, but they can have this sort of like their own logic of distribution, etc. So yeah, just to have that as point of completeness, or an example of such.
Could I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
What I'm seeing there in front of me, is that really a network? Because of the following thought, doesn't a network kind of is not the prerequisite of a network that there's kind of a loss of memory in between the nodes, or potential loss of memory anyway in between the nodes, and that like the structure that I see there in front of me, are these not all like qualified and like yeah, my theoretical vocabulary doesn't go this far, but like are they not all kind of structured onto one another in a kind of non-rearrangeable manner? And isn't the kind of idea that you brought up previously more really like a network idea, because it has the kind of faculty of recomposing itself in that way?
Yeah, definitely to the last part, like that is a key part, and I'm not representing this as like actually to aim at. That's kind of what I tried to highlight with this, like to think about this generally rather than what is the actual form here. In terms of is it a network or not, I think the concept of network is problematic in the sense that it's kind of overextended. It's become so important in the last few decades that we've kind of like taken this concept and kind of stretched and stretched and stretched in it. So usually like of course there are networks where certain parts can be locked in. It's a way of kind of designing a network in itself. And it's very hard to say like what would be a litmus test of a network overall. Like in a way, like is for me, I would say yes, this can be thought in the family of networks. Is it representing all the true or potential forms of a network? No, of course not. But and I wanted to raise it mostly like to point out how it has this sort of recipe form, and how it connects to at least a network-like entity, not to kind of like to present it as some kind of fully fledged example of networks to be followed. But yeah, so yeah, maybe a spontaneous sharing semi-spontaneous, not some glorious example.
But I think I want to just mark this even for myself, also maybe because that in the, forgetting now about this particular image, but in the kind of proposition that you made earlier, there is I think in a significant way, this design of forgetting.
Mm-hmm.
It's like totally in there. And I mean, I'm just finger on this because I'm really happy about it in a way. Like, yeah, to find that, like 1 week after we spoke about it, like to find such an example of how this can be thought.
And I think, like, if one thinks about this, I mean, this has been fairly high level, just to kind of paint the picture, like the landscape. But if one thinks about this more, like taking steps towards kind of practicality, like few levels down from the highest level, and first of all, I think we have already many building pieces towards this, like the whole, like the structures in this OBOK. First of all, like being based on kind of scenes and roles and how they interplay and how they can be offered to others, which is about networking and sharing, of course. And then like the sort of filters, which are really lenses, and kind of being maybe the most free structure because the filter is kind of something that doesn't have to be part of the structure, but you can still look at the structure through the filter. Like you can think of them as almost like these universal things that anybody could say bring to an organization or whatever. Like all of those are kind of already trying to formulate or give form to many of the approaches needed here. Maybe the calibration can be slightly different and they can be extended, but there is a good basis in that architecture of like some building blocks towards this. But in terms of like what one could try to paint for people, say, like roughly speaking, playing such a game, or starting to play such a game. Of course, one of the hearts would be to enable them to play such scenes, to enable them to decide how to run the scenes, to enable them to build architectures around the scenes, like how the scenes connect and so on, but also to enable them to share such structures that they create and the kind of saves they create from them, and maybe even kind of create larger networks, like oh, you developed this chimerics. We actually incorporated that into our what you saved from there to our organization or our game, or call it whatever. But we've also extended it. Like, let's say what Martin said about chimerics in the last session, they actually took that as, and then they put it in a character that is maybe not even Martin, but somebody else plays that role, and then and expands those thoughts, like something you defined there in the game became a starting point for somebody else, but they made something out of that. So it allows this sort of building of relations between instructions. So that's kind of a path of what the players can think they can do. They don't have to do all of those things, but like roughly that's the picture you could have. Like you can play the scenes, you can decide how they are run, you can design how they are structured, you can share them from their savings or from their ingredients, roughly speaking, and then you can incorporate into your play whatever others have saved, whatever ingredients others have created. Do say.
Oh, sorry, just one small comment to those that map you showed. When I was much younger, kind of game mastering my first role-playing dungeon camp scenarios, and there was a few different groups playing this sort of like map. And first time I kind of we did it like like they said in the rule book or in the scenario book. But the second time I needed to just like also to make myself enjoy more. I needed to do something for the map in order to make it more playable for me or interesting, and I just like changed the exits and entrances to different levels and so on in the dungeon. That I like to think that it gave a few different like approaches and strategic like alternatives for the people playing, and it was so easy to just like say that no, this exit isn't here, but it is here. And then following from there, one other thing, like usually when there is a small group of explorers and they maybe go together because they are stronger that way, then they say that your role is the map maker. But another way also would be to kind of okay, let's slice this map into a grid of like 9, and each one of us will map 1/9 out of the whole map. Or then like you go that way, you go that way, or just like every one of us will draw our own map, and then we will put them together, combine them, and see, okay, this is maybe interesting, we will put this into the picture here, and so on. So kind of this sort of like distributed map making or something like that.
Yeah, and also like, what if your role is the saver? What if your role is the saver of topic X? What if you are saving actually for example, like the kind of thinking the person has who is developing inside the play of chimerics, or you're saving is like that you're trying to save a general description of that. This is like about the kind of new kind of modern thinking of like that the game master is just a player, and then like actually it's you can completely break it down. But it also means that the players are not just necessarily characters, but they can have like roles that have like other rights and responsibilities, like and that creates different kind of play. So in a way, like thinking about it more openly, like yes, you're a player, maybe you're playing even certainly playing a role, doesn't even have to be a character. Maybe a role is precisely just to be the saver, like you're not even otherwise taking part, but you're listening to everybody else. Or maybe you're doing both, whichever. Like that's like the kind of palette that opens up from there. And I also completely agree with you, like you, for example, changing the exits. Like what is also interesting in this culture is this sort of right to modify is generally just assumed. Like people, they sometimes take the form and but everybody knows that there is no one way to run. So there is no canonical way of this is exactly the faithful way or it's the best way. It's like somebody reads something through and then they take one rule and then stuff it in completely different situation and change one quality about it, and it's normal. Like it's completely normal. It happens all the time, and that's an interesting cultural take, because I think it has developed because it's so structurally possible, and it's also so structurally fertile. Like you can think of taking the room, and it's also interesting. Like I like the design of that room, but I'm playing here, so I'll just like put it and expand it here. Or I like that character or that person, or I like how you roll for the weather. so I'll take that or that or that. And so like there is this sort of almost like a natural modularity, which is why I think people have gravitated towards it. It's already there. So there's this whole culture that's based on this sort of like modularity and of usage of anything. Like, because everything is ingredients, you can just take the carrots and you can do something completely different than a carrot cake. So yeah, like but like how do you feel about this? Like if there was a game guidebook and that would tell how to play this game, what do you think about these topics of like that one would have to communicate to the players, that these sort of possibilities of how to run scenes, how to organize how they run, how to utilize these sort of saves and how to think about them, and how those become sharing points, and then the sharing opens up into this sort of highly flexible integration and relation between parts. Is there something missing, or is it like somehow wrong, or whatever comes to your mind?
I think it's really evident, and it sort of like relates to this aggressively open source logic that we've mentioned before. And I believe there's like two components, right? What we're talking, one is like the forking, just like there's this thing and you do a slight variation, and that is a thing in itself.
Yeah.
And then there's also this modularity where you come up with a concept, let's say chimerics, like last session. And then you can sort of like apply chimerics to all of the other open spaces. So what does it mean to have chimerics as a move? Yes. What does it mean to have it as a role?
Exactly.
What does it mean to have it as a goal? What does it mean to have it as an item, right? And then sort of like every time someone introduces a concept, the whole combination, the whole tree of possibilities just opens up as open spaces. And that's just really, I don't know, productive for people to just like fill up those spaces, right?
Yeah, so exactly.
Yeah, if we can formalize that mechanic of how concepts just expand into all of the OBOK elements, that would be really useful to grow this organically, maybe.
Yeah, you're completely right. And that's a very good highlight point that you're making there, is like precisely this, like when something is created, like it's a, once again, a quality of this incrementality, not a word, but you know what I mean, like that that you can wrap it into different things, which was precisely like what does it mean as a role, even as a particular role, what does it mean for adding it to this role, but what does it mean as an aim, what does it mean as a goal, and these are just different wrappings that it can be put into, which then creates different possibilities to play. Like that's definitely something to point to the players. Like there is a play culture that knows this, but then many people don't maybe think about that. So that's, I think, something that is very much to be communicated, that there is like there's almost like the material and wrapping, like that, and what you're creating, what you're using is almost like you put some sources in, material sources, and then, but you can also wrap it into something else, which increases its applicability and the forms it can take.
I think, Pablo, you answered to a question that I didn't ask because I was waiting for not to kind of speak all the time. But my question, maybe just to kind of for my clarification, Pekka, you drew a line between, so this is not the carrot cake, but this is the recipe. You know, we want the things that are that happen that can be picked up upon to be thought of as recipes and ingredients rather than whatever artifacts, things. I think what Pablo did just designed is a bit of response to that, I think. And because I was wondering, like, where do you draw the line? When is it so that a thing is not a thing? And I think it's then like when that same thing can be another thing also. so because I was thinking of our concrete, we came to think about the problem of not being able to forget when last week we ran into the conclusion of our first scene, where then we was like, okay, so anybody else who can now pick up on that game, they can't not know what we just did, and they cannot unform it completely out of what we had created. But like Pablo, I think what you just said is like beautiful in like now chimerics is a property, or now chimerics is an act, or like it's super nice.
Yeah, it's a very clear form, and also kind of communicated in a way that already points out how it could be communicated so that people understand it. Like, of course, like put more words around it, like how the kind of perspective you took. I think it was very clear way of putting it.
And in an organizational kind of vocabulary, like when maybe the vote is the goal, or the vote is the way, or the vote is like a character running around. Like I think it's super nice. It's really beautiful.
And vote is also a method of saving, because that's what it's kind of in real life. It's like we have this process which says no, actually we saved it to a yes, which then like actually locks in this pathway, or no, which is locks another pathway. So vote is quite literally a version of organizational saving. Because then, that part, what is then voted upon, becomes a reality recorded into the organization and its new state. So it really kind of checks the boxes of saving in many qualities. But yeah, like continuing like this sort of advance to practicality, I think we have quite many of the ingredients. So let's put it first softly, like proposing such a game, or like once again, game here as a loose term, but like I think it's a good kind of framework to think about it. And not that it's the key point, but I think it's quite funny that it's actually to a T playing organizations into existence. It can also play a university into existence. I think for still, by the way, for university, there's a really interesting kind of reconsideration towards teaching and learning. Not completely new, because it kind of actually traces towards many of the new contemporary ways of learning, etc. But it also has some fresh takes. It's part of this. But like, yeah, if we have the tools to propose such a thing, and such a thing could be kind of formulated, would that be interesting? And if it would be interesting, to which extent, and how one would approach it practically?
I think it's super interesting, and we've sort of already gone through that path in a way. I would imagine, or I don't know, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I imagine sort of like this, whatever the output is, guidebook, or even a game with this sort of like meta structure. That would be interesting to phrase it, or to frame it as a game in itself. Of course, but I imagine it as not very long, like if the document right now is 8 pages long, maybe it's 16 pages long. And then there's like a lot of examples, and we play it. And sort of like these examples become the provoking sort of like mapping of the potential, right? Which is infinite. But I imagine like examples and playing it and bringing it into the more concrete would be the most productive way of engaging with these concepts, I believe.
Yeah, and practically you're completely on point in that rules can be quite short and the rest is examples. If you look at many of these sort of successful games on this side, Microscope, etc., that's what they are. Like, they're not necessarily that complicated, like to explain what is the basic structure, but then what the examples do is to bring people to this understanding of, well, there is a kind of play culture, like thought of here, which might not is usually not only apparent in rules, but it comes through this sort of examples. Oh, that's how they mean to play it, and like not that you have to play how it's example, but the examples really help people to see. And the interesting thing about examples, they don't have to be passive. They can actually be cases you can use. So you can approach examples not just like, here's a thing for you to read to understand. They can be at the same time, here's a thing you can also use. It's
a seed for you to play.
Yeah. It's a save. Yeah.
A save, yeah. And also, I believe like this could be, play a new organization into existence, but also just plug it into your meetings, right? You have your organization is working, but your meetings are not. Here's this that you maybe can use, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What about others? How does it sound to you? Like as a practical direction to propose?
I think this sounds very good, and many times I have actually in another context I have been thinking about that. Hey, some sort of like publication would be in order, but here, kind of, if I think it as a like teacher, not that much a bureaucrat, but a teacher, I would be especially interested in the kind of bestiarium or herbarium of like of these different kind of like receipts, and also like how to make them, kind of not kind of how to make this certain, but how to approach creating them, or something like that. What sort of mediums, something like that. The way you show this like map-like structure and so on. What can you do with that? And then it goes into kind of locks into the practicalities and examples and saved states and so on, and kind of and if there would be this sort of like some sort of like structural flow throughout the publication, where you somehow like kind of go through it all, also like in the form of like rules and examples and so on, also something like that. But kind of it would need to be kind of there would need to be crystallized concrete things, and then like also this sort of like framework, and but all the pieces sound very good.
Yeah, and also like there's a lot to steal from in terms of like how to represent things. Not that one has to make things always stylistic and spiffy, but I'll just share the screen to give anecdotal example here. So this is another dungeon, but it's completely different in terms of like, this is from Silent Titans, which is this sort of quite talked about because of its, let's say, its experimentality, roughly speaking. So, I mean, you won't see it too well on the screen. I can zoom a bit, but like it would be better to have it's a PDF, but in its way. But so, like, just to show it, like, so you have this intentionally quite vague, but a building nevertheless. The building is kind of concrete, but it's also quite metaphysical. So as you maybe can see my mouse, like it's actually kind of puts the corridors in lines. And then a lot of the things are kind of like in the sense of intentionally vague, that play can turn how things actually move from one place to another different. Also, the places are like, they don't try to be authentic documentation, but it's a lot about the kind of feeling or like generally expression that wants to be given. But like, so, but of course the text is a key part of it. So the place is called Dementia Bomb, there is a general description. This is Patrick Stewart's writing, so it's highly kind of learning from 19th century things like this. Like so, it's like the world blurs into shape, like a fractal diamond clockwork if swept into the time tornado. The bolds, by the way, they actually mean something. That there is a whole like a systematic language going on at the same time. So a time tornado is an existing concept that is elsewhere in the world, the book, etc. But yeah, like this text is like an introduction that sets up the situation. But then after that, there is like something super concrete, like do these things, which is go from player to player, ask them who they are and what they look like, which is actually defined earlier in the game. So this is not coming from empty. When everyone knows who everyone is, this is by the start of the game entrance. When everyone knows who everyone is, take some time to describe the situation. And the pieces begin clinging to the stairs of the spiral tornado, which is opposite page, etc. Remind them they can ask about anything they can see, hear, otherwise sense. Take time to describe and re-describe whatever players look at, answer all their questions until they are firm in where they are and what the choices are. Make sure everyone is fully informed before anyone starts taking actions or rolling dice. Very different language, but the whole point here is like we're setting a kind of a hazy situation. So we're also setting these rules of actually kind of like working with the haziness. And then the places themselves, like well, here's the spiral tornado. This is meant to be run by a game master, but what the game master gets is also kind of fragmented, but thought out. Like that they know, like they have to create a description which is not this description here, but they get certain kind of factoids, like a bell, once again described elsewhere because it's in italics, tolls above you. A living tornado of broken time, make of that what you will, which is the underlying text here. Ivory and onyx walls whirl, open bronze and closed ebony doors. Then brain apes, once again in bold, so described elsewhere, attempt to blast you from the stairs. Deck save or fall into a parasite web, which is underneath here. But that's a game system reference. Like deck save is dexterity save, and like telling like there's a game mechanic in play. Like if you're there and like you might fall into the web underneath. So I put this in like not as like here's a perfect example, but make this sort of contrast of a completely different way of treating of creating a save of a space. Of course, still in this sort of dungeon paradigm, but even within that, like to point out to this sort of the kind of vastness of range of expression, composition of different mediums, like images are important here, and the visual artist, whose name I cannot remember offhand, is a big part of it. But then also like different expressions, system expressions, more kind of color, more learning from literature kind of expressions, etc., all kind of working together. But yeah, like just as to give an example of this possibility of what is an example, or how free rather the making of an example can be, or how much range it can have.
I think this I mean, this is beautiful. This is really, really nice, and how important the graphics are to convey the tone, right? And I feel if we commit to the meta, we should also commit to have like a absolute diversity of tones.
Yeah,
where we can have like this very poetic approach with a certain type of graphics, and then have something completely different, maybe for another example.
Yeah,
that's sort of like in its own execution points towards the potential of variability, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, that would be very interesting, and also opens up the door for many possible collaborations, right, with different people.
Yeah, and it's once again a potential strength if we do that. Like, not that we don't have to be super excellent in anything, but like in terms of having this diversity, is because it once again refers to this ingredient-like quality, like how everything is a source rather than an endpoint. It's like a starting point rather than an endpoint. Is that in real world there are many groups that have played this particular Silent Titans, and then they have moved even the same group of characters into another place, which can have come from a completely different, more traditional representation. Its ingredients are completely differently formed, etc. There's a lot of talk actually about like how practical or impractical, or how some people find it actually freeing that it's so open and others don't, but like it's a whole discussion. But it's completely possible because you have ingredients that the other part actually has, like the other place you move, other scenes, other locations are based on completely different ingredients and completely different ingredient style. So like they could have gone, like, I don't know where that first map was. Probably somebody's just made it and put it in the internet. Um, Probably not published in a book. But they could have moved, like, been here and then moved there, and that totally works. So I think it's a strength to then utilize different styles, because you're also kind of pointing out that the different styles can merge, they can converge, they can relate. And that in itself is an interesting quality that is underutilized, I think.
I think what comes to my mind is both, or like maybe a bit what Mikhail was also saying, that I think it should be both a way of how to save, meaning in our case, I think to some extent also how to document, because I think it's a bit like the structure we're talking about is the structure itself in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And I was also thinking of these, there were, I'm not great on kind of, and also don't intend to be on kind of phone games, but I've had a few, and some of them make a really nice way of like switching them on and having to read no instructions, because kind of they walk you into their mechanics. And so there's hardly any, sorry?
Tutorials.
It's not really a tutorial. It's more like the first levels are made so for you to understand, you know, like, so you start playing immediately and you kind of are given capacity further as you go along, you understand, and so and begin to know. And so that's what I also mean by the game. You know, the description of the game might be the game itself, or the game might be its own description in a way. And so I think what that would, however, require would be that we would kind of begin exploring how this game would want to document itself in a way, like really, and that's what I mean with Mikhail, like really in a material way also. Is it really, do we need to even write anything? Is it, you know, drawing stuffs and then, or is it taking pictures of things, or like, or whatever? Is it a tweet based thing, or and then the other thing I think that like is the cooperation part, because that is also, I think that would just be, I don't know at what point one switches that on, so to speak, but that I think is also then something to be really emergently found, I guess. That like, I mean, we're like super happy with the plan. I understand all four of us are like, yeah, that's it, let's do this. But like, there's like I think 8 billion people who know not what we're up to. And so that would also be interesting to just find out as this proceeds.
I think, yeah, there's a lot of possibilities of cooperation. Like, in a way, if you share it and somebody runs it, that's already kind of like even if you don't know it, it's like it's a collective, it's a feature of collectiveness. But of course, it can also be direct collaboration. Like, you ask somebody to do something, create. I mean, in our language, this can be considered a save, or it can function in the same, like this whole book. It has saved somebody's mind into ingredients that somebody else runs. Like, and so somebody creating such things is a contribution potentially. But also like somebody collaborating in the sense of offering a place where the game is run and they have some interest of developing something, whether it's an organization or a particular topic or concept or a style, whatever it is, and then whatever is kind of saved from there can return back to the system. So then the collaboration was both the event and what's saved from the event, which feeds back, and somebody takes it and permutates it completely because they found the saved interesting, whatever it is. Like, but like there is this sort of like a wide palette of relation avenues for collaboration in this, like so people can be kind of like they can allow, or people or groups can be quite individual about it. Like, we don't care how did you play it, we played this way, but they can still feed back to the collective in this way, that the way you played it and what's saved from there might feed into something else that you didn't even know about. And this is kind of like it's related to open source, but I think it's opening up this sort of like if actually open source is a paradigm that develops, what kind of ecosystem can come from such paradigm? Because it's more than just everything being free. What is a proactive form that actually starts from sharing as a kind of proactive quality, to the point that what it has, like how it represents itself, is kind of calibrated towards the sharing. And this is why I find this sort of culture, this certain kind of small, quite young cultures, quite interesting, because I think they have gone quite a ways of solving certain things, or at least finding particular solutions towards this kind of questions already. Not that they are the solutions, but there's a lot there that can be kind of like taken, like, oh yeah, that's a good approach, or oh yeah, you've actually already, and there is about thousands or tens of thousands of books or records that kind of have different solution towards this sort of ingredient like quality. So I think it's in this sense like it's a useful source towards finding this sort of answers of what is this sort of proactive sharing, which I think this can have. And maybe that is actually another quality to mention as part of the game, as kind of conceptually, like I mean, it sounds cheesy to say beyond open source, and that's not how I would put it, but like that thought, like that what happens if you have an ecosystem that actually is calibrated towards sharing, and can accommodate individuality and still be sharing in its quality. But yeah, I know I've been kind of maybe rambly this time, because it was like I was refactoring or reconsidering it in the last couple of days, and then maybe this morning pieces started falling. So the pieces are a little bit muddy, and therefore I'm sorry, apologies for being kind of a little bit rambly and slightly all over the place in terms of and lacking exactness in form, etc. but I do think like the thought holds even after sleeping over it. I think like there's a lot of that is rather solid underneath all the mud, so to speak, in this form and in that kind of a direction and a game. And like I agree with Pablo that it doesn't have to be super big, and I think it actually should aim itself to be rather concise, to not to make it into a monumental task, and also like it can always grow, and it's also better if it grows by adding more people in and more people contributing into it. I'll also stop sharing this. This can also set too much of a high bar in some ways, like but yeah. But if we then can come to this sort of practical point, what could be the next steps? I have some ideas, but I've talked already way too much.
It's really funny that you say you're rambling when I felt this has been one of the most concrete sessions we've had in terms of like examples and goals but moving forward, I don't know, there's many ways. Right now I was just thinking because of what Martin said of the description of the game being the game itself, how can we create scenes that explain every concept in the OBOK, right?
Yes.
Like how to play a dynamic, have a group dynamic where you understand roles, where you understand rights. That could be interesting, and one way to do it, like instead of explaining it, playing it.
Yeah.
Each concept in the OBOK.
Yeah.
That's an idea, but not necessarily the best way. Maybe we do need to do a bit of tutorial, maybe not, hopefully not, right? Like it would be ideal if we don't.
I think if it goes to that, so I certainly would need a bit of a run through of the OBOK elements, but I can do that maybe on my own. But what could maybe be interesting, if that is kind of supposed to be / going to be the kind of periodic system on which this should be built, then I think what we could maybe try is to begin with the kind of setups that we know now in terms of like scene and kind of game master mechanics, and then kind of try to maybe kind of train a bit in how to set up the different elements that we need. And maybe Pekko, you could be a bit so that you say like, okay, now we need a consider your rights, consider your filters or whatever, so that we can really kind of try how to sculpt this in a way. And then maybe also, so because like, again, I'm saying that I'm not super firm with this OBOK territory right now. So, but maybe it is so that like, we don't need its whole extent, or we don't, you know, but we could, I think most important for me would be right now to train both kind of interiorly to the kind of creation of a playable stage, but also exteriorly toward saving, and then how toward kind of making that saving communicable with other participants, if that's what we want to be calling that, or like joiners. And so like that we would really because like I think there's many, certainly tons of questions still on the way, but there's also tons of kind of really concrete definitions to be solved. Like, do we use a pen and paper? Do we use like material stuff? Yeah, so this is how I thought it, because I thought like last week was really also productive or generative, as we say today, like in that degree, that it really brought meat to the bone in a way. And yeah,
a couple of practical comments. Like, I think like listening also, Pablo, your comments in the slide. I think definitely it should. Also, I think for the fertileness of the process, to develop it through playtesting and going here, like this time, like it would have been possible to maybe think of testing some of these ideas and have some concepts for that. I think it was useful that we kind of like what we grew last time is kind of like looked at. So this has been more kind of high level view and not really playtesting. But I think like the common direction should go back towards playtesting these things. The second thing, like what's the medium? The interesting quality here is there is a kind of a medium independency. Like meaning that it's flexible in terms of what medium it takes. Like people can totally play this, like that they have the rules on paper or on a computer screen because, and then they play it in real life. But just as well, they can play it over a video chat, create a way to play it on some other platform, which is, by the way, which is people are already doing with this kind of game mechanics, because it's possible. And I think it in this sense, like, of course, you can have mediums that are made easier, or here's another channel that takes care of some parts, but that the fact that there is a kind of medium independence is also a strength. And then in terms of OBOK, I kind of saw it as kind of way of creating this sort of rough model, like a starting point of like, let's put some of the things down, but totally the pieces can be like ripped from there and reconsidered, retailored. Like it's in no way a stone. I do think they're a good source to throw into this pile because, like, well, in a way, like what we ran last time was very much in kind of that spirit. Like it was precisely putting kind of roles, the roles where you were who you were, because that was, I think, interesting. But then it was very much scenes. But I don't think there's any need for faithfulness towards what's already in OBOK. It's more like looking at, oh, these are good tools. Let's put in the tool bag, and then let's actually kind of formulate how to communicate the most useful tool bag we can think of. So yeah.
And just a quick note maybe on that medium independency. I'm not sure that I see it maybe the same way. Maybe that is going to change. But at this point, I see that there's two things that need materialization or spatialization, as you wish. That would be the mechanics, but then it would also be kind of the saved states. And I think like if then I think then it does make quite a difference if a saved state is, you know, containered into a hashtag that goes on Twitter, or if it's containered into a blog that runs, you know, forward into infinity, or if it's containered into kind of poetry book of which you get an edition sent to you every month or something, you know, like I think there's quite because and I think in that sense it is not medium independent because it is supposed to grow over time, right? We are supposed to explore the mega dungeon in a kind of additive way. I don't want to say, but you know, like iterative, additive fashion. And then probably there will also be some mechanical updates on this. So I think there is a consideration to be taken in which way we want to spatialize this. And by spatializing, I include digital spaces as much as any other spaces for sure. But I think, I mean, the thing is, like, we're also already kind of doing that in a way because we're spatializing this, as we found out in the YouTube video. So like, it's just like this, there's a kind of synchronity, asynchronity question, which I think some condensation on a kind of non-in-time medium or differently in-time medium could make sense in order to kind of set a different rhythm in between teams who play this or so stuff.
Yeah, agreed. Just one sentence. Maybe it's maybe medium independent is too fussy. I would kind of say that the medium becomes part of the choice of expression. That like you decide to put it in this medium because you think it works for the expression.
Yeah, and that makes it in that sense very dependent. I mean, that's then really integrated to its language in a way. So yeah.
Yeah, but Mikael.
Yeah, just to continue. Next time we are playtesting, could there be a possibility for each of the players to create kind of save points during the playtest, because then we get the record, and afterwards we could then like start considering, hey, we have this save point here, what sort of like medium could it transform into, and then after the playtest we could also thought, do we need to create some sort of like memory search in order to reconstruct something to be saved, or so on. Kind of, it sounds very good aspect. Just one that comes out of my own interests at the moment. I would love to be able to at some point try kind of try out like running multiple scenes at the same time, kind of multiple threads, and see how they interact with each other, or how they can be managed at the same time.
Sounds interesting, and I think you're kind of already pointing out that maybe the next week's playtesting is playtesting saving. That like it can have, like, we can take different forms, like some role takes this, like I'm saving this, or other forms. We can come up with those forms, and maybe that's a good emphasis, because it kind of like probably opens up certain things out of there. So that if it sounds like what fits with your thought, but I think that could be interesting as well.
I think like this sort of exploring different ways, different mediums of expression is, and sort of committing to the medium dependency with different examples. The best way to sort of like show how diverse this can be is using all of them, right? Like maybe some saved states are the Twitter, under a Twitter hashtag, maybe there's also the poetry publication, and it sort of like shows that all of those are possible, right? Like by embracing medium dependency in diversity, you can show that it is not medium dependent in some way.
Medium expressivity. I don't know. We can come up with a better term, but I do think it's a good thing to highlight once again. In this, there are several really good points already here. I've been trying to mock them. I've been trying to save them. Like that these actually need a coining term, like, because they if they communicate it alongside the game, it opens up how it's also a perspective in a wider sense towards organization, but also structuring, like this sort of proactive sharing, and what does it mean that we go to actually forms that are proactive towards their sharing. And that's another, like Pablo, your concept, and the kind of wrapping on the source and the wrapping quality. Many of these kind of probably coming up with some terms, also like how to give them a name as a phenomenon is something to be done. But like, I think there are many there that are at the same time like an interesting thought or interesting approach beyond also the specifics of the play and the game. Was that a cat, Mikael, or
there was? Yes, that was a cat.
Actually, that was a fly this time.
A fly.
I was
very playful. I'm starting to feel that sort of like whatever the outcome is, the game, the guidebook, the whatever this is, it's sort of like a saved state from what we're doing here.
Yes.
Basically, I think that's maybe a good way to introduce the exercise, right?
Yeah.
That's it.
But I think, like, you say.
No, just, I mean, I think that I was just thinking that while the two of you spoke, is that I think what bothers me a bit is this kind of outcome thing, because it to me it is so cognitively occupied in a way, because I think like what I feel like is that we have a lot already. I mean, it's massive. I really feel that there's so much kind of substance now, really concrete structures, very specific kind of mechanics and like perspectives, and so I think it's a safe state. Yes, it's going to be a safe state. Yes, but I mean, it's already in the making. Like I think, you know, like I think I would be. There's a friend of mine who Pekka, you might meet also now in the conference stuff. He said, be very careful with events, because events can exhaust. You know, just like don't think of events. They just do. You know. And I took that very much to heart. I think that's a very, very great thing to say. And it's a side.
The last word was cut off. What is the last sentence?
I just said it's a side comment that I'm making, not more. Like it's kind of.
No, completely agreed. Like I think you're right on this, and it is really like it's also a kind of mind state, like how output is primarily an input. Like whatever is the outcome.
Say that again, please.
Output is primarily an input. Is because whatever is the outcome, how it actually becomes an outcome is it's an input for somebody else's process. And it's actually true for everything. Like somebody writes a book, it's primarily an input for others. Like even though it's like for the person, it's an output. And that's why I like the input output, and because input output logic kind of has that in, but like one can highlight how output actually to become part of the society, it's an input. But yeah, like but yeah, I agree with you that there is already a lot, and but it's also like not to treat whatever comes here. It's not the safe state of the whole, but it's an output that can become an input for others. So yeah, and I'm also interested.
Just very quickly, just by this, not to say that I would kind of discredit or like you know lower in relation anything that could look like a book or could be any. That this is of course not the point. It's not to do away with those ideas.
Yeah, and I'm actually, speaking of ideas, I'm also very interested in Mikael's idea of running several scenes in parallel. Maybe we can think about,
yes.
Yeah, if you're ready, that could be part of the next week's play session, maybe. And we can use there maybe the Telegram to communicate about that. If you have ideas, like it would be good. Because of course, anybody who's ready to run tests, that should be encouraged. I do, and talk, and too much anyway. But hey, with that, there is a time frame there. And anyway, we're kind of quite long in the time scale. But I think like the idea of it, whatever we do next time, put emphasis on the saving. Like it can be in different structures, but it's kind of like it's a thematic to playtest. I think it's a good idea. I was sensing that was a good idea for others, but like if somebody disagrees, you're free to disagree. But that could be a good kind of one topic to put to the next week's playtest. It should be a more playtesty anyway. And
so sorry, I was quickly distracted. So you said that the subject for that could be the saving and the multi-threading.
Yeah, like if Mikael is ready, like we could talk about that. Like that it has to, but it would be really cool. Like if somebody brings a testing scenario, like doesn't have to be the only one. We can have like fragmentary tests and so on. But like if you're interested, we could definitely talk about it.
Thanks. I can send you a private message for that. Like it's more like relating to this questions and answers and cards and so on, like kind of playing multiple items and how they could kind of benefit this or the other way around.
Yeah.
So
I mean, however we organized, I think it would be good to include whether it's next week or whatever time, like, and it would be welcome in the process, certainly. Like, but I would, however we run it, like, I would put the saving as one of the topics, because it sounds like it's something to explore here, and it's like a lot of things have already opened up from there, but I do think, like, in play, other things that are still hidden will probably appear as well. But with that, any last words to our bird flying overview session?
Thank you.
thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And I'll post a link to, well, I can post the links if you want to see links to Silent Titans or whatever. Like, it's an interesting book. It's worthwhile. It's not too expensive. Most you can get actually spiffy hardback book of it as well, I think, if it's not out of print. But there is a PDF and it's well done. And then secondly, I will post a link to, I'll rewatch it. There is a good video on tutorials and kind of this sort of integrated tutorials you were talking about, Martin. It's concerning video games, but it's a good video. Like how they work and pulling different examples that are. So I'll post that to the Telegram group, because it's probably interesting material.
Yeah. Pekka, at this point, I know this might be a bigger question, but might it be beneficial to open a Discord for this group?
I'm completely open to that. Like it's really like the only reason for Telegram has been that I thought it's the easiest way to keep people there. But like I think, like, if people are for Discord, we can definitely have a Discord as well.
I'm just thinking it's becoming so kind of diverse in types of, threads we have, or even if it's now references we share, because like I think that the examples that you've been bringing up and even the PDFs that you've shown, they all trigger all sorts of kind of, memory.
We're just finishing.
Oh yeah.
Do finish the sentence. We can stop from there.
You just to say that I diversify the channel a bit and say, okay, we can store, game examples in a channel, and we can have whatever kind of time-based chat in another channel. I think that the Telegram works super well because it's a one-liner, but I think we're having now more than a one-liner at this point.
Yeah, let's talk about that. There's actually some silent people who actually are actively watching, and it would be bad to lose them. But we can talk about this, maybe practical ideas for next week. Like, it can be like a short update on this. Like, I think both have their strengths, but let's talk about it. But I'll stop the recording.